time. It's just a little bit after 6 o'clock. And so we are going to do a very short presentation for you, just talking a little bit about the Jepson School of Leadership Studies. My name is Kirsten Soderlin. I'm one of the associate deans at the Jepson School. I work with our admissions process. I work with all of our experiential education, whether that's internships or our community-based learning classes. I work a lot with our alumni and connecting our alumni to our students. And I'm very fortunate this evening to have two members, recent graduates of the class of 2021. I have Grace Miller and Alec Grevin with us this evening. And so I'm going to talk just briefly about the Jepson School, things that are highlights, things that you may want to know about as you get ready to register for classes if you're interested in the Jepson School. But then I'm also going to let Alec and Grace talk a little bit about their experiences, because I think it's really important to hear a student perspective about the way that they sort of maneuvered through our curriculum and how they've sort of leveraged their leadership studies experience. So the Jepson School, we really are about educating for and about leadership. And so I always talk about the about part first, because our faculty would be upset if I did not begin there. And so our curriculum really looks at leadership as it was, leadership as it is, and leadership as it should be. So when we think about leadership as it was, a lot of our humanities-based faculty sort of fall into that bucket. We have a very eclectic group of faculty at the Jepson School. All of them are drawn from traditional liberal arts backgrounds. So none of them have a leadership studies degree. They come from psychology, sociology, religious studies, economics, anthropology, literature, philosophy. And so they bring those academic disciplines to bear on these large questions and this complex phenomenon of leadership. So leadership as it was isn't just looking about the history and who were the leaders. It's also thinking about all of the context surrounding those individuals. So what was going on, culturally, nationally at the time, followers and other individuals who supported and or did not support leaders. So what can we learn from the past? Those are important things. Leadership as it is, if you think about our classes that sort of fall into that bucket, I think we can all agree there is no shortage of things to talk about in contemporary society that relate to leadership. And so a lot of our social scientists sort of fit in this bucket, but it's not mutually exclusive. It's not like social scientists don't dabble in the leadership as it was, or that the humanities-based folks don't dabble in the leadership as it is. But leadership as it is, really thinking about lots of questions about power, persuasion, influence, how individuals are able to impact others and move others, and work with groups for good and bad effects, and thinking about issues of justice and inequity. That really fits in both buckets, both leadership as it was and leadership as it is. And then that third bucket, leadership as it should be, is really Jepson's focus on ethics. And so throughout our curriculum, there's an emphasis on ethics, but our capstone senior class is a leadership ethics class. And so our goal in the end, really, we're not necessarily trying to create a little cadre or legion of leaders that we're sending out to overtake the world, right? We're really looking to make effective and ethical citizens in whatever role they play. Sometimes they're going to be leaders. Sometimes in our lives, we play those roles, but there's much of our lives where we're not in leadership roles and we have other ways to influence and participate in making change. So that's really the about part. The for part, we have a real emphasis on experiential education. As I said, those are some of the things that I'm heavily involved with. So for instance, we have community-based learning classes like Justice and Civil Society that's really asking questions about what is justice and what does justice look like in our society? And is there disparity and inequity, which there is, in the way that people experience justice? And a portion of that class is that we send our students out into the community, and they're working with community partners who are working with a variety of different populations, most of them underrepresented populations, so that students can really go out. They can be reading about theory and thinking about ideas and concepts in the classroom, but then really go out into the world and sort of be able to evaluate and think about, um, you know, how is it really playing out and what does it look like in society, and grapple with those issues. We have an internship requirement. So all of our majors will do an internship between their junior and senior year. They intern in all fields and industries. So we have people working in nonprofit. We have people working in finance and management organizations. We have people working in advertising and public relations and journalism. So students are able to leverage and use their leadership studies in all sorts of different fields and industries for their internship. And that's where our alumni work, right? Our alumni work in all of those fields and industries, because leadership studies is applicable no matter where you work. You're always going to have people above you. You're always going to have people below you. You're all going to have colleagues that are working with you, and thinking about those dynamics and how we work with one another and influence and create change and move things forward. So that's another really important part of our curriculum. And we have lots of other classes that have experiential elements to them. Those are just two that I'm going to sort of cite. And I think, the one other thing I would highlight before I let Alec and Grace talk a little bit about their experiences, Jepson is a relatively small community. So we typically have a class of maybe 100 students. Students typically come in as sophomores. And so, we admit sophomores in the fall, and then we have juniors and seniors. So it's about, 300 people that are part of the Jepson community. Although students from across campus can take Jepson classes. They can take the intro classes, they can take the electives that we have. But it's a relatively small community. You get to know your faculty really well. In a non-COVID time, it's very likely that you will go to one or more faculty members' houses for dinner. You will be in very small classes, probably 22 people at the most in most classes. They're very discussion based. So faculty are not going to do what we are doing to you this evening, which is speaking at you. You're expected to come and engage, and really think about not only how you're presenting your perspectives and ideas, but also how do you listen to and integrate and make meaning of other people's perspectives, and sense of the world. And then I think, we have opportunities to do research. Our faculty love to do research with students. They not only like to invite students in to help them with their research, but they work with them when students come to them with research questions. We have an honors track where you get to do an honors thesis, which is very much akin to doing a master's level thesis. You have a committee, you do a defense at the end. We have a program called the Jepson Scholars Program, which I think possibly Alec Grevin might talk about. So I'm going to let him talk about that. We have an opportunity. Grace, did you do Jepson at Cambridge? Okay, so we have a great program called Jepson at Cambridge for anybody who might be an aspiring attorney. And that's something that Grace could probably talk a little bit more about. We have resources that are part of the Richmond Guarantee to support Jepson students when they go off to do their internships, so that they can get funding for the summer to offset their costs. We support students to go to conferences they want to go to, whether they're just attending the conference of interest or they're presenting research or doing some other kind of presentation. So I think, it's a very tight-knit community. We have about 1,700 alumni. And the alumni love nothing more than to connect with our students. I can tell you this past year, we have a program we do every year with our alumni, and traditionally they return to campus. We usually get about 60 alumni who come from all over the world. They've come from Europe, they've come from California to spend the day with our students and work on professional development and talk about your Jepson elevator pitch, explaining leadership studies in 60 seconds or less. This year, when we were dealing with COVID, we went virtual. And the beauty of that was that we were able to have alumni from literally all over participate who didn't have to be in Richmond. And so over the course of a month and a half, we sort of stretched things out from a one-day event. We had over 80 alumni contribute upwards of 400 hours, spending time with our students, doing virtual office hours, talking with them about their career trajectories, their graduate studies, and those sorts of things. So I think the University of Richmond in general has very generous alumni, but there's something about the Jepson community and that it's so small. We create this really sort of very tight web, if you will, if we use a Richmond, Richmond language. We have this very tight web, and our alumni love nothing more than to connect with our students. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm gonna let Grace go and share a little bit about her experience. Again, she and Alec are both class of 2021 graduates. The floor is yours, Grace.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Grace. I graduated this last spring, originally from Naples, Florida, and I double majored in leadership studies and political science. I would say originally what brought me to Jepson was I actually did a pre-orientation program with Dr. Sutherland, where we studied leadership in the arts, specifically through Hamilton, the Broadway show. So that's what got me into the leadership school to begin with, and stayed. And yeah, I guess we did a little plug earlier for Jepson at Cambridge. So I'll talk about my experience with that, because that was definitely one of my favorite Jepson experiences. I actually did with Alec as well. We were able to spend 5 weeks in Cambridge, England, and studied comparative politics between the US and the UK, as well as legal history. And that was actually transferred as one of our elective credits at Jepson for our major. And that was just an amazing experience with some of our University of Richmond law students, as well as Jepson students. We got to take these courses in a fully immersive environment. Being in Cambridge, England was absolutely amazing. A great thing about Jepson is how encouraged we are to go abroad and take classes abroad, something I loved about my experience. And then another thing that I really feel like Jepson helped me a lot with was something Dr. Sutherland also mentioned, was the internship immersive class that we had. You take a half a unit over 2 separate semesters, and also do some work over the summer a little bit with an internship that you have to complete through your Jepson curriculum as a major. And I interned at a consulting firm called Avison in Washington, D.C. It ended up being fully remote because of COVID. But through Jepson's help, especially Jepson alumni, there's maybe 6 or 7 alumni at this firm that I was able to connect with before my interviews. I was able to do this internship, and now we'll be starting work with them next Monday. So that's exciting, starting, I guess, my first job. So yeah, Jepson was definitely a huge part of my college experience. I did pretty much everything through the school, was involved in their student government, did a fellowship program also with Alec outside of school. And we actually, first semester freshman year, took an FYS with a Jepson professor our first semester. Yeah, so we've had a pretty connected Jepson experience, but I'll pass it over to Alec to talk about his experience too.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, we've been able to do a lot of fun things with Jepson, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate. Is more than a lot of other schools at Richmond, you're able to do a lot of different things that are outside of the classroom, or just even the things inside the classroom are a lot more involved, or like really impressive environments like Cambridge. So I've really enjoyed being a part of Jepson. One thing that I really like about it is it's interdisciplinary. The way that I wanted to study and do things is I did not want to pigeonhole myself into one topic of study. And most of the Jepson majors end up double majoring. And that's what I did. So I'm philosophy, politics, economics, and law, PPL, and leadership studies. And so it's a great way of analyzing leadership through a variety of different angles. Another thing that I really appreciate about Jepson is the fact that you're able to have really close faculty relationships. So I've gotten to know Jepson faculty, and they are incredible. They're so good. They're from a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds. So they're really, really neat people. You should get to know them. But then they also work collaboratively in a way that's I've not really experienced that much at Richmond. And then I've not heard about people having outside of the classroom. So like as an example, Dr. Flanagan, Dr. Jessica Flanagan at Richmond had a close relationship with me, and she knew from my work in the classroom that I was interested in free expression issues. And so I remember I was at our office hours, and she just said, "Hey, Alec, we should write a paper together, and we should go get grant funding." And so she walked me through the process. She applied grant funding. I worked on the application with her. We ended up getting a $3,500 grant. I ended up doing a semester of work with her. We ended up writing a paper, and she offered to make me a co-author of that paper with her. So we ended up co-authoring a paper together. It was recently accepted for publication at Public Affairs Quarterly, which is a peer-reviewed journal. And so that will be coming out in print this coming semester. And so like that's an example that not only do I get to work really closely with one of my professors on stuff, that's related to things that we're interested in, but then also to, be invited as a co-author. That's just not something that you get at like a large, university where, you're in lectures of, like several hundred students. So this is really, really like close and engaging things. Another really interesting thing with the program is the internship program, as Grace mentioned. It's great for pursuing things where you're interested in and also kind of building off things there. So I did my internship at the Institute for Free Speech, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. And I'm actually doing that this summer. I received a return offer from them. And so I was able to do a lot of writing and research stuff with them. So they're really neat internships out there from a variety of different sources. And I guess the final thing that I'll mention, and obviously there's a ton of things I can go into with Jepson, is the Jepson Scholars Foundation. And the Jepson Scholars Program is connected to Jepson. It basically wants to build a pipeline between the Jepson School and Oxford because Bob Jepson wanted to build that pipeline. And so very generously, he created the foundation where they offer you a full ride to Oxford to pursue a 1-year fully funded master's program. And so I got accepted into that program, and I'll actually in September be flying to Oxford on a full ride to get my Master of Public Policy. And they'll also fund any 1-year master's program, so it doesn't even have to be a 1-year program. And so that's just one of the fantastic ways I'm actually able to continue my Jepson experience on to Oxford past college. And so it's a life-changing opportunity, and I'm really, really excited for it. So if I can answer more specifics about that or anything other with Jepson, I'm happy to, but couldn't be happier with Jepson School.
And so one of the things you just witnessed as both as Grace talked and started to make all the connections, and Alec, forgive me that I forgot that you did Cambridge. Jepson students get to know each other really well. I think one of the things that students often joke about is by the time you're a senior, you know exactly how to press the buttons of your classmates, right? So you know exactly how to get them started and what they're most passionate about. And I think one thing that Jepson students and alumni often say is, Jepson didn't tell me what to think, but Jepson taught me how to think, right? So students talk about, I have a totally different perspective on how I take in information, right? And that I want to go out and look at a variety of different perspectives and get as much, many different kind of ideological insights, irrespective of whether they're those that I, embrace or not. And so I think that's one thing that routinely both our students and our alumni talk about. So all three of us could go on and talk at length. And I definitely do want to talk about, since you are all going to be registering fairly shortly for your first semester of classes, what you should be considering if you think you want to actually kind of dabble in leadership studies and check it out, or you already know that this is the route that you plan to go. But I do want to open it up to questions. And so I don't know if any of you have questions for us about the curriculum, about different opportunities. You can put them in the Q&A.
I can jump in because I see here's a question about application process.
Okay.
And I actually was also, something I didn't mention before, I was a teacher assistant through Jepson with Leadership 101 this past year. So I got very close to a lot of Jepson freshmen and sophomores, which was also an amazing experience as a senior to be able to reflect on kind of the original class that brought me into Jepson. But the Jepson application process is pretty simple, not anything to like get super stressed about. More or less, you have kind of a short response about like why you want to join Jepson, at least from what I remember. And then you have 2 recommendation letters, one from your Leadership 101 professor if you've taken that class, or 102 professor if you've taken that class. And this is your first semester of your sophomore year. So by that point, you need to have taken one of the 2, or be currently enrolled in that class, and that professor would write you your recommendation letter. And then it goes to a board in Jepson, and they, I guess, go through the applications, and I believe it's like around a 75% acceptance rate. So that's kind of how that process goes your first semester of your sophomore year, which really gives you time also to explore kind of other areas of interest. So I definitely recommend taking Leadership 101 or 102. Leadership 101 is probably my favorite class I've ever taken. So much so I went back and took it again 2 times. And I think it was a really eye-opening experience for me. But I also was really thankful that I had all of freshman year before I had to apply to the Jepson school to really explore other interests. Because like I mentioned earlier, I'm also a political science major, and I love being able to take those classes with kind of more of a quantitative lens, really looking at quantitative patterns in politics, and then also pairing that with my qualitative, Jepson classes where focus more on asking questions and really expanding how I viewed, things around the world.
And so to jump in, because I see on follow up with Grace's comments, she did a great job explaining the admissions process. It is not nearly as taxing as what you just went through to get into the University of Richmond. That I promise you. And the whole process will take place in the fall of your sophomore year before you have to register for your spring classes. So you'll know if you've been admitted, we will give you advising, you'll know what you need to take. So somebody asked about both what should I take during freshman year, and about are there gonna be seats in 101 and 102? So here is the good news. If you look right now in Bannerweb, it looks as though there's no seats for 101 and 102. And that is because we have not opened those seats up until all of you, our incoming students, start to register. So even though right now registration is open for returning sophomores, juniors, and seniors, they can't get any of those seats. So there's 11 sections between 101, which is leadership in the humanities, or 102, which is leadership in the social sciences. So kind of, again, looking at that bucket of leadership as it was, leadership as it is, right? 101, 102. When you guys go to register, all of the seats are going to open, and we are holding those seats specifically for first year students. Okay. So those are really the primary classes you would start with. Sometimes students will come in and they will take a class in the fall of their freshman year. They'll take 101 or 102. You don't have to take one before the other. You can take either one in whatever order. Sometimes in the spring, students will say, I'm going to take another class. 102 fulfills a general education requirement. It fulfills the social analysis requirement. But you could also take 101 or 102 in the fall. And then if you wanted, you could take justice and civil society in the spring. You could try something different. You could take the experiential based class that I was talking about earlier. You only need, like Grace said, either 101 or 102 to apply. And as soon as you've taken one of those during freshman year, you are immediately on my radar. So I am going to start sending letters next week to all of last year's first year students who took 101 or 102. If for any reason you've got other plans, you've got other programs you're looking at, you don't take 101 or 102 your freshman year, don't panic. You could take 101 or 102 the fall of your sophomore year when you're going to be applying, and you can still apply. And our faculty are accustomed to that. They know they're going to have some students every fall who are in their very first leadership studies class. So they're going to be writing an evaluation for them, even though they've only had them in class for, let's say, 6 weeks or so when they write the evaluation. But it's definitely beneficial if you could take one of them your freshman year, because then you have a full semester with that faculty member, and they're going to be much better versed to talk about your academic performance and abilities when they go to write that evaluation for admission. So.
And also, I guess, talking about some of the other class options, because that's one of the things I like about Jepson is you're covering leadership through so many different angles. I agree with Grace. Leadership 101 was one of my favorite classes I've taken at the entire school. So just because they have that 101, 102 label, that doesn't mean that they're like, oh, just like skimming the surface. Like, it's a deep dive with like top tier professors doing really, really engaging work with leadership. So highly recommend taking either one of those. I personally like starting with leadership and humanities, but you may have different preference. But some of the other classes that I really, really liked at Richmond, and they usually get offered on a recurring basis. So you might want to keep your eye out for them either for this application cycle or maybe future years. But the first is leadership in the international context. That's with Dr. Hidalgo. He basically runs a bunch of simulations. And so it's really kind of like applied leadership in historical context. So we learn about the historical context, and then we're given particular leadership roles. And our job is to, basically battle within the confines of the game against other players, negotiate, give speeches. So we did World War I, we did the Indian independence movement, and we did the Rwandan genocide. And so it was a class that was really interesting because it was also like leadership in action, but then we also learned the historical context behind these factors. You really kind of see the difficulties and challenges relating to that. I took a class on evolutionary leadership with Christopher von Ruden. He's an anthropologist. Basically like looked at leadership from an evolutionary perspective, and basically how did leadership evolve? How is leadership in humans different than it is in other primates? It was really, really interesting. It looks at like basically how does democracy emerge? And then the third class I just want to highlight is leadership in healthcare contexts. And so it looks at the ethics of healthcare, bioethics, emerging technologies. It really applies that ethical lens. And that's one of the things that I really like that Jepson does, is it really has a lot of focus on ethics, and so really, really good ethicists in the program.
And all of those classes that Alec just highlighted, they're electives. And so if you're a major, you need to do 4 electives. If you're a minor, you need to do 2 electives. But our electives are open to anybody at the university. So actually a student at the university could take one of our electives, even if they haven't taken 101 and 102. So you could take 101 or 102 your first semester. And if you decide, hey, I want to take another one before I apply, you could also take an elective. If you can get a seat in an elective, we have group dynamics, we have leadership on stage and screen. We have a whole host of really unusual classes that you could consider taking. And one of the things I will put up in the chat on our website, we have a place where you can actually go look at the syllabi for classes. So if you wanted to go, if you're thinking about, I'm going to take 101 or 102, you could actually go and see, okay, well, what does 101 look like when I take it with Dr. Kaufman? Or what does 102 look like when I take it with Dr. Harwell? And I think that's a really good way to make a decision, right? So you're talking about, if you take 102 with Dr. Harwell, she's a behavioral economist, versus if you take 102 with Dr. Hoyt, who is a social psychologist. So it's nice to be able to kind of compare their syllabi and see they're still aiming and talking about very similar topics, but they're getting there in very different ways with very different literature. And so I'll put that in the chat so that folks can go and check that out as well. Do folks have other questions that we can answer for you? I cannot believe we've answered all your questions. So I will say this, if you come in a Jepson student, everybody will get an advisor. So if you are a major, even if we are not your home school, so both of our guests here this evening, Grace and Alec, talked about having a double major. When you come to the university, it's not uncommon that people have double majors. So you have to choose, like, is your home school for Alec going to be A&S with PPEL, or for Grace, going to be A&S with political science, or is it going to be Jepson? That really matters in regards to what degree you get, right? Is it going to come from the Jepson school? Is it going to come from arts and sciences? But irrespective of whether we are your homeschool or not, you will have a Jepson advisor, and then you'll have an advisor in your other major as well. If you are a minor, both myself and the other associate dean will work with you and walk through the curriculum with you and advise you as you're registering. So everyone's going to have an advisor at their disposal. There was something else I was going to say. I'm sorry. I was just trying to look at the website as well. But I think, you know, we have tried to provide as much context. We always have our classes up in advance of them being on Bannerweb, so our students can plan, even if the classes aren't up in Bannerweb. We also cross-list some classes, not a lot, but some. So for instance, we have classes that are cross-listed with psychology. We have classes, Alec talked about the ethical decision-making in healthcare class. That actually fulfills a requirement for both healthcare studies, if any of you are thinking about healthcare studies, as well as Jepson. We have cross-listed classes with political science, so it's possible Grace may have even gotten an elective that checked both boxes. And with the business school, which is not an uncommon pairing, our ethics class, our capstone class, fulfills the requirement that the B school has in regards to ethics. So I think it's relatively easy to pair leadership studies with pretty much any other major on campus. And I will say that we have probably had every combination. So yes, business, yes, PPEL, yes, political science, and things that might seem very obvious. But we've had people who have done theater and the fine and performing arts and English and everything in between. One of our seniors who actually won our James Mcgregor Burns Award, which is our highest award at the Jepson School. She was an honors student, an honors track student, and she did work with Dr. Kristen Bazzaio, and she basically produced a play. So she wrote a one-woman play. She actually acted the play. It's up on her website. So again, I think our students and our alumni certainly find that leadership studies pairs with everything. So
I guess kind of going to that question, because leadership studies pairs with almost everything, that means like you see careers in almost everything. So there is a lot of people in Jepson that do consulting work, so you're able to do things in a variety of different contexts. There's a lot of students that do graduate work like I'm doing. I'm also planning on down the road going to law school. So a lot of students go to law school and then become lawyers. And then like Grace and Dr. Soderlin might have other ideas, but you can do a lot with Jepson.
We have people who, so one of our alums who we just did a program with this past spring is a vice president at CVS, and we did a whole program with him in regards to his work with CVS in regards to rolling out the COVID-19 vaccinations. We have people at the US State Department until just recently, until the change in administration. We had somebody at the White House who was the lead advance person for Melania Trump and a special assistant to President Trump. We have people who are working within other government agencies, the CIA, the FBI. Both of those agencies really love leadership studies students in regards to their analyst positions. We have people who are vice presidents for Capital One. We have an alum who is working. He used to be the general manager for the Toronto FC, and he is now back in the States, working with another soccer organization. We have somebody who is working at ESPN, Mark McShay. We have people who are working at NBC Universal. We have folks who are working in healthcare and who are leading nonprofit organizations. So right here in Richmond, we have Virginia Supportive Housing, which is an organization that works throughout the state to develop housing accommodations with wraparound services to try to ameliorate issues of homelessness. They have a tremendous success rate. Allison Bogdanovich, who is the CEO, is one of our alums. She, in 2019, took in a Jepson student as an intern and made an offer to that person and made a job for that person who graduated in 2020. So, Grace talked about getting a job from her internship at Avocent. This was a nonprofit who created a job for a Jepson student who interned there. Another one of our Jepson alums right here in the city of Richmond is the vice president for Virginia Inclusive Communities. And so literally our alumni are working in every field and industry. We have lots of success sending people into medical programs and nursing programs. I think that the emphasis on ethics, which, Alec talked about again, our emphasis on critical thinking. So our students see great success. We have a science leadership scholars program. And so folks who are have another major or minor in the sciences, whether that's the hard sciences or mathematical economics, geography, computer science, they can apply to be part of the Science Leadership Scholars community. So that's like a smaller community within the relatively small Jepson community. And so we have really seen a lot of people pairing the sciences with leadership studies and finding that that's been really successful for them in terms of leveraging and using what they learn at Jepson in terms of moving into those fields and industries. And I just put the link up in the chat that will take you directly to our syllabi, so you can get sort of a flavor of what you'll be doing in Jepson classes, what you'll be reading in various classes, and also in recent electives and things that we've offered. So. All right. So I'm going to ask Grace and Alec, any parting shots, any last things that you would say, things that you haven't had a chance to highlight or talk about?
I guess one thing that Dr. Soderlin briefly mentioned, which I forgot to mention, is there is an honors track that you're able to do with Jepson. So it's optional. I ended up doing it. It's really, really neat because it's basically it's a very similar function to like a doctoral work or a master's thesis. I had Dr. Flanagan was my lead advisor, but then there were two other faculty members on my committee. They read through my entire thesis. I worked over a year to do the thesis, and then I also had a half year before that, which was the thesis planning. So they do a fantastic job about setting you up. It's also great if you really want to explore a topic, or also if you want to end up doing graduate school work. So it ends up getting published on the Richmond Library database website. So that's another really neat opportunity if you end up wanting to go the honors track. It's a very established program there. As just a final thing, Jepson, highly recommend that you look into it. And I like that it's flexible. There are so many different opportunities that both Grace and I were able to do and be a part of it. And those opportunities really you can't find at other schools and also other areas of the Richmond community.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just hop in and echo that. I did not come into the University of Richmond thinking I was going to major in leadership studies. I was one of those people who took leadership classes for the first time my sophomore year, but it very quickly became the majority of my experience, especially serving on the Jepson student government. I think that's an amazing thing that Jepson also has, is just how focused on the student experience like the Jepson faculty are. So I sat in on faculty meetings. I was able to help interview possible new professors. The student experience is really on the forefront of all of the faculty minds. So I think, that really just shaped my school experience. And Alec and I are both here just still talking positively about Jepson, despite the fact that we've already graduated and, aren't here for any other reason, just the fact that Jepson really was an amazing undergraduate experience. And I'm really thankful for my time at Jepson. So I hope you guys, look into it some more and have an amazing experience with Jepson yourselves.
So I just put my email in the chat. And if Alec and Grace are open to that. If you wouldn't mind sharing, I know it's always better talking to students or recent graduates or alumni than necessarily asking me questions. And I agree, they're far more interesting, and their experiences at Jepson are far more interesting. But yes, I will say I have 80 rising seniors right now who are out doing their internship, and they're very stressed, and they're working 40 hours a week and writing reflections for me. So I did rely on our recent graduates, and I immediately wrote to people, and like that, they wrote back and said, yes, I will be online and I am happy to speak. Which again, I think is testament to the fact that people feel connected, and they want to stay connected to the Jepson community. So, I am going to make one last call because I know we're looking at like a 6:45, 6:50 finish. Does anybody have any remaining questions? We can't see you, so all we can see is anything that you type. I will say that on our website, we try to provide really great information. We are one of the only programs that provide syllabi, so I think that would be something that you definitely want to check out. The other thing I'll highlight too is if you were to go to the alumni section of our website, and I will put this in the chat as well. Every year for the last, I don't know, at least 6 or 7 years, we have been doing senior videos. And so if you come to the university and you walk through the Jepson School, when you walk around the bend on the main floor, you see all of our composite photos, right? So we take pictures every year with all of our majors who are graduating. And when we do those photos, we also create a senior video. So we film everybody. I think they're really helpful. I think you hear pretty much, we get almost every graduate in the video, unless they just argue with me and won't do it. And so you hear about lots of people's internships. You hear about people's research beyond research you heard about today. You hear about people's jobs. You hear about various experiences they had at the Jepson School. And so I put that link in there as well. You can go back and look at different class years and hear their stories. And we were really fortunate, irrespective of COVID, that we were able to do that for the class of 2021 as well. So if you go and watch the class video, you will see both Alec and Grace speak again. But I think that's really helpful as well, because it just provides more student voice, more student experience, and more student stories. And you'll see they're really, really varied. But all of them, the students have found sort of a niche and a way that leadership studies fits into their other academic areas of interest and their interests outside the classroom as well. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I am hopeful that we'll see some of you in 101 and 102, because all of those seats are going to open just for you. I may have an opportunity to talk to you during orientation. Sometimes there's interest sessions about different academic programs during orientation. And so I encourage you, if we do that during orientation this year, that you come and I'll get to see you in person, which will be really exciting. And so I hope you all have a lovely evening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. And we are so excited to have you join the Spider community. And we're even more excited if you might join the Jepson community. So with that, I wish you all well, and we will hopefully see you all in the fall.